Mr. Sullivan is the GIT Group Manager at Michael Baker. He serves as Baker's Geospatial Information Technologies Group Manager and Industry Lead for the development and deployment of enterprise GIS programs for municipal government. He specializes in providing expert guidance to cities and counties to unlock the potential of their existing GIS and asset management databases.
That's right. That's me.
That's all you.
As soon as I get access to the thumb drive.
Try to put it in a, is it not coming up?
Yeah.
Try to put it in a different port, maybe. There's another USB port. Let's see if it'll read that. There you go.
Okay, there. Okay, great. Thank you very much. I am down here from Virginia Beach. Not sure how I'm getting home. We'll find that out, playing it by ear. I'm going to give an overview. FirstNet. Is anyone familiar at all with that term, FirstNet? Anyone familiar with Next Gen 911? Who was here with Tim Detroit's presentation? Okay, you know, we've got a lot of technology going around, and it's all very interrelated, but slightly different. And there are a lot of different initiatives that are going on. So this is going to be an overview of FirstNet to let you know what it is and what the implications are. And again, when you think about Next Gen 911, there's going to be a huge amount of responsibility now placed in the GIS departments of cities and counties, whereas it hadn't really been there before. So we'll just go over that and let you know what's coming down the pike. So what is FirstNet? FirstNet is the First Responder Network Authority created by the Job Creation Act of 2012. It is actually a authority within NTIA, and what the FirstNet, what this is to build a nationwide public safety broadband network. Now, what exactly is that? And we'll get into that. So, states are receiving the grant funding to begin research, to begin the planning, to begin the outreach necessary to deploy this. So different states have farther down the path, but the funding is out there to begin this program. And the first phase of this is state and local outreach. What's our current situation? So right now, first responders pretty much have two ways to respond for communication. Most police officers use, all of them land mobile radio, which are the heavy radios that they carry along with them. And then, of course, they also use cell phones to respond and communicate. The problem is, while radios are very dependable, you can't really transmit much more than voice on them, right? And cell phones are great because you can view a lot of things, but then they go down when you have a big emergency and you have a lot of people, you can crash the network. So I've heard Boston Marathon come up a couple of times, and this is my beautiful sister at the very beginning of the Boston Marathon 1 year ago. I'm not sure when it's coming up on the anniversary, but it's April, so less than a year ago. So my sister lives in Winston-Salem. She qualified for Boston. It was her big dream to go up there. And her husband, Dan, is the photographer. So there she is there with the pack and getting ready to start off. These are the elite women going down. Has anyone had a friend or done the Boston Marathon? It's a fantastic event, and my sister was really very, very excited to go there. So these are your elite runners coming through. Now we're looking up Boylston. So this is my brother-in-law. The bomb goes off not much more than that. So the timestamp's 2:36. My sister is up there. My sister passed about 9 minutes ahead of the explosions. my brother is looking up, right? And so then he goes around to the left because you can't go through that crowd. So he goes the street over and then passes up on that other street. And he hears a loud boom from construction is what he thought it was. So by the time my brother-in-law made it around the corner, my sister had gotten through and they had, along with all the other runners, made it to the area where they rest and relax and catch up. My sister knew it had been a bomb or been an explosion. Knew there was explosion, figured it was probably not good. My brother-in-law, when he comes around, he did not know that yet. So at this point, when my sister is getting this photo, she knew that things were not good, but she wanted this photo because she wanted her memory of the Boston Marathon to be the positive experience that it was. And it was a wonderful experience for her, going through all the neighborhoods, all the support, all the people, all the cheering. And she wanted this to be her memory of it, and was not going to allow the terrorist act to overshadow that. Soon after this, they got 1 or 2 phone calls out, and then every cell phone went down, right? No one could do anything at that point. So that, and the idea of setting up a broadband network for first responders has been around a while. But every time we have one of these events where the system goes down because of overuse of cell phones, it reintegrates the need for a separate network for first responders only. All right, so fact or fiction? Authorities deliberately shut down mobile networks to stop additional remote triggers. Who says that's true? There's one. Okay. I got one person to raise their hand. False. So the Associated Press reported that that had been the case, but it was a false report, and they retracted it. They brought additional, mobile network capacity. The network providers did. They set up additional, I'm not quite sure they set up, but additional bandwidth to handle the additional calls that were going to happen. But once the explosion and everyone got on the phone call, it was simply overwhelmed, and they were not shut down and would not be shut down because the benefit of having the networks available is much more than the damage that might be caused through other types of means. So first explosions at 2:49. By 3 o'clock, cell phones are being severely disrupted. By 4 o'clock, law enforcement, they finally realized they were homemade bombs at 4. At 5:30, AT&T tweets. For those in the area, use text rather than phone calls. So I heard some interesting earlier in one of the sessions about texting. So texts stack, right? They stack on top of each other. If you try to make a phone call, it just doesn't go through. But texting stacks, meaning you're getting in line. And it may take a while, but that text will get through. So that's one way around the huge volume of calls. So text rather than call. Fact or fiction? Boston already had a dedicated broadband network for first responders. True or false? Okay, you're all correct. It's false. However, interesting. Back in 2008, Boston applied for an FCC waiver to do that exact same thing. So now we're however many years past 9/11. We know it needs to happen, and they actually went through the process of working with the FCC to develop an independent broadband for the Boston area. They received the waiver, but they never built it because of lack of funding. And again, they tried to boost coverage prior to the marathon, but it wasn't enough. Okay, so what FirstNet is eventually going to do, we're at the very first stages of it, and the outreach is going on right now. But ultimately, the goal is to build a separate network. So what you're looking at really is additional hardware on existing towers, and you're looking at potentially additional towers. So that when first responders go to a situation and they get on their phone, they're not competing with public traffic. Okay, they're not competing. They're on a separate bandwidth. If you want more information about FirstNet and what's going on, this is a great site. So ntia.doc.gov, and you can find a link there to FirstNet. So there are a lot of questions out there that don't yet have answers. What are the costs to deploy? How do you want to deploy it? Where do you deploy it? And this will be decided and evaluated on a state-by-state basis. And I think, so we have a relatively big federal program. We have funding passed down to states. If I told you there were politics involved, would you believe me? And so different states are handling it different ways. So Minnesota's moving forward. My understanding in South Carolina is that they're waiting for additional information on how this is going to work. What the process is going to be like. What is the business model? How will it be funded? So I can imagine a user's fee on cell phones is potential. Some of the 911 fees that are already paid, that goes into that type of funding model. So those are some questions that don't, that are still being evaluated. So what are the impacts? So again, initially, it's coordination and planning at the local level to determine what are locals doing. Where are they with their planning for next gen? And that's a piece that is not really even it's an important piece that's going on, but not necessarily tied directly to this. They're kind of two different flavors of emergency response, two important initiatives. So has anyone heard of EZNet? Okay, so a couple folks have. So EZNet, and some folks sometimes think that this may be the same thing as EZNet. EZNet, and we heard a little bit earlier, EZNet allows different PSAPs, public answering points, to communicate better with each other. So it's a network that connects the call centers so that if they need to transfer calls to one another, they can do that more easily. That's EZNet, but that's not FirstNet. So what FirstNet would allow is better communication to first responders, to the responders out in the field. So FirstNet is more mobile. So you're thinking your mobile devices when you're out in the field, something that can get you video, something to get you pictures, or those types of things. So that's what the difference is with between EZNet and FirstNet. So first, a couple things we do know about FirstNet. So FirstNet is going to be based on LTE, 4G technology. So LTE is just kind of a flavor of 4G, and it's what's been adopted. They decided they're going to use that. It's going to be placed on the 700 megahertz band. So interesting fact: this is when the FCC looked at their spectrum. Some of it's kind of old and unused. So this is old TV band that used to be allocated for Gilligan's Island, and so now it's not being used as much, and so they're allocating some of this band and saying, okay, we're going to use this for the first responders network.
Is that part of the frequency or the band that Google bidded on that says that you have to open it up to everything?
I'm not sure about that, and I wish I was more versed in the band and what's in it. But you can look at it. It looks like a rainbow, right? So if you look at the FCC monitored frequencies that are out there, they allocate bandwidth, and they auction it off, right? So they've done that, and so if you Google it, and I don't have it, but you can Google that bandwidth and say, okay, this is being used for this, and this is allocated to this, and this is, some of it's public and some of it's private. but I do know that the bandwidth that they're looking to use here is older bandwidth than yes.
If they're using the bandwidth for emergency purposes, why would they take the risk of sharing it with something else?
I don't think that that's what's going on. So they're allocating a very specific bandwidth for this purpose, and it wouldn't be used by anything else. But the entire bandwidth is, so it's just a portion of the bandwidth.
I was going to say the 700 megahertz is like 400 blocks. So this is just one of the blocks.
Oh, right.
Google bought 50 of them, and other companies bought some of them. This is just one or a few of the blocks.
Thank you.
It's not that there's cross use.
So at any particular geographic area, also having satellite backup and or portable hotspots. So this is LTE coverage for South Carolina, so pretty solid coverage. The pink dots are public safety centers, answering points. Okay, so these are the takeaways for GIS managers. The whole premise of the presentation was, what do GIS managers need to know? And we heard it a little bit in the presentation earlier regarding Next-Gen 911. But, and I'll continue the conversation. So what this means really is, if you think about what first responders want, what do they want to transmit? Imagine Boston Marathon, or imagine another incident where everyone's going to need to be getting on their phone, and what are they going to be wanting to do? The fact of the matter is, it's our GIS data that's going to become mission critical. So it's our GIS data and our applications that we build at the local level, at the county level, that are suddenly really going to play a part. That's going to be addressing, it's going to be parcels, it's going to be feeds from the video, like the video feeds that we saw earlier. It's going to be shelters. It's going to be shelter status. It's going to be street closures. It's going to be all those types of things that the GIS data that's managed at a local level. As GIS folks, we know how important the data is for normal municipal and county workflows. We don't often realize, or we don't often ask ourselves, how would this information play in an emergency setting? We now need to begin to put ourselves in that frame of mind. So our GIS workflows, especially when we think about Next-Gen 911 and addressing, those workflows are now mission critical, or will be in the next very few short years. So new addresses from a subdivision that get put in, or an apartment building, those addresses need to get into the address file immediately. And I've worked with many different clients, and sometimes there's addressing backlogs, right? We all know what a backlog is. With Next-Gen 911, originally, the addressing data for 911 systems used to be provided, and for the most part still is, by the phone companies. They provide the addressing data for the landlines that goes into the MSAG. GIS folks haven't been responsible for that. And how often do we go over to the PSAP and talk to the dispatchers? They sit in their dark room with their computers, and God knows what they do, bless them. But this is what's happening. That MSAG address data with the migration to Next-Gen is now going to be the addressing folks in the county, in the city. Because all that addressing information is going to be done at the GIS level, not by the phone company anymore. And it's going to need to be mission critical. So imagine the need to get an address from a new subdivision, a new apartment building, a new development in the system, correct, up to the appropriate database design format, the NENA standards, uploaded and available and pushed over to the emergency call center. All right, then the last one, this is tough, liability too, because now you're in that path, you're in that critical path. Street namings, what happens if And so now we're talking about emergencies. We're talking about we're talking about emergency responders on the scene right now, needing information. And with FirstNet, you're going to have the ability to transmit those GIS applications, those web applications that won't crash, that'll be available on the smart devices by the officers out in the field. And they're going to expect that the data is right. It's one of those crazy things that as technology advances, and it puts more and more burden on us to have the data right. So I'll wrap up with that. Other than to say, again, I think some of the things we've heard is the awareness of the issues. You know, at what point in time do we think we'll actually have a FirstNet out there? 5 years? Maybe in 10 years, we're looking back and saying, hey, now we've deployed our FirstNet. And probably, realistically, it may be deployed in certain areas other than others. For example, Boston, your larger metropolitan areas. But it's one of those things that will probably get built out over a period of time. So it's certainly not going to happen tomorrow, but it's where the technology is going. So,
yeah, how many phones currently have the hardware to support this right now?
Well, it's zero.
Okay.
So what would happen is you'd set up the broadband network for first responders, and then they would get cell phones and smart devices that would be programmed to hit that spectrum. So if you I guess mine is Verizon, so I hit the Verizon network, and you would have a first responder device that would hit the first responder network. So let's say at Boston or some other event, or the big one that's coming up that was presented, and I'm not familiar with the bridge run. Yeah, the bridge run. So that's a good example. So at the bridge run, let's say you something happens nice, so you're standing next to somebody who has a cell phone that doesn't work. If the first responder, then if he would have a cell phone, he's hitting a different network. So one person couldn't make a phone call, first responder right next to him could make that phone call.
Yeah, and are any of the manufacturers on board to create the phones with the radios in them?
I don't think that the technology hurdle is there on the device end.
Okay.
So I think it's very simple and it's a good question, and I'm kind of tap dancing here a little bit, but it seems to me it's no different than having a Verizon phone or an AT&T phone. You just have a FirstNet phone.
Well, I know that they operate on different frequencies, and some phones have radios that operate on some frequencies and not others.
Okay, and I don't want to misspeak here, so I think there are issues probably before that one that would need to get resolved. Yes?
How long do you think it's going to take for different states to actually implement something?
Well, Baker, we're actually starting off with Kentucky right now, and the first phase is SLICP. It's not the best of acronyms, but it's state and local outreach. So I think I had a slide. So I mentioned politics earlier. One of the issues with this is kind of coming out of the feds are funding it to the states, and they want a local outreach component. So the last thing they want is a federal push. So they're sending money out. I'm speaking freely here, but the way I see it is they're sending money out to the states, and the first step is the state and local outreach. So to begin education and find out, how a program like this might work, how it might be designed. So if this is just the first step, I know certain states have moved so states get funding and then they issue RFPs or they self-perform. So Minnesota is moving ahead, Kentucky is, and different states are also trying to figure out, well, what do we do? There's so many issues out there. We've heard about next gen. That's just a big pile of spaghetti right there we've got to work through. And this is another one. So I'm going to say 5 years, 10 years, how many, having said that, who would have guessed where we would be right now 10 years ago? Right? I mean, it's all moving so fast. You know, I say 5 years and, you know, it could be 2. I mean, everything moves so fast. Any other questions?